But here's what makes this dish genuinely strange. Almost no one outside a specific geographic and generational corridor knows what it is. Mention it to a food historian and you'll get a polite blank stare. Search major culinary archives and you'll find almost nothing. The Chipwreck Casserole exists almost entirely in the spaces where American food history actually lives. Spiral-bound church cookbooks, handwritten index cards tucked into recipe boxes, the faded photocopied sheets that got passed around PTA meetings in 1974 and somehow survived into the present. It is, in every measurable sense, a forgotten dish, and that makes it one of the most interesting dishes in American food history. To understand how the Chipwreck casserole came to exist, you have to understand the specific economic and cultural conditions of mid-century America. The post-war period produced a collision of forces that no food historian fully anticipated. Factory wages were rising but still modest. Supermarkets were expanding, stocking shelves with products that hadn't existed a decade earlier. Women were entering the workforce in growing numbers, which meant dinner preparation time was shrinking. And the processed food industry, canned soups, frozen vegetables, packaged snacks, was spending enormous sums convincing American housewives that convenience wasn't laziness. It was modernity. Potato chips were part of that story in ways people rarely discuss. By 1950, American chip manufacturers were producing more than 320 million pounds of potato chips annually. The industry had exploded during World War II, when chips were classified as an essential food and exempted from rationing. Said soldiers ate them, factory workers ate them, families ate them. By the time the war ended, potato chips weren't a novelty. They were a staple, and like any staple, they showed up in cooking. The logic was actually sensible once you accepted its premise. Potato chips are already seasoned. They're already cooked. They add crunch, salt, and a subtle potato flavor to anything they touch. Home cooks in the 1950s and 60s were using them to coat chicken, top casseroles, and add texture to dishes that would otherwise be monotonous. Campbell's and other soup companies even began suggesting crushed chips as a casserole topping in some of their promotional recipe booklets. The chips as ingredient concept wasn't eccentric, it was in the air. What made the chipwreck different was the decision to put them inside the casserole rather than just on top. That's the detail that separates it from every other chip-top dish of the era. Someone, and we'll never know who, because these innovations never happened in test kitchens with documented trials, realized that chips baked into the body of the casserole did something unexpected. Surprised, the bottom layers absorbed moisture from the soup and meat, softening into dense, flavorful pockets that tasted almost like a potato gratin. The top layer stayed dry enough from oven heat to remain crispy. You got two completely different textures from the same ingredient simultaneously in a single bite if you got the layering right. That's not an accident. That's cooking intuition. Someone understood, even intuitively, that the moisture gradient inside a baking casserole would affect the chips differently depending on their position. Bottom chips, braised and salty, meaty liquid. Top chips, roasted by dry heat. The same chip transformed two ways in the same dish. The name chipwreck is almost certainly a pun. A wreck, as in a disaster, something gone sideways, applied to chips. Whether the original cook intended the wordplay or the name emerged from family teasing, it carries the right implication. This dish looked like chaos, chips buried in brown ground beef and cream soup, the whole thing slightly ugly before baking, and then out of the oven, that top layer golden and fragrant, the edges bubbling. It looked like a happy accident. It tasted like one too. Regional variations emerged quickly, the way they always do with dishes that travel by word of mouth rather than publication. In parts of Iowa and Nebraska, the recipe called for cream of celery soup instead of mushroom, which gave the base a lighter, slightly vegetal quality. Some cooks in Wisconsin added shredded cheddar between the chip layers, which created a third texture, melted, slightly caramelized cheese, threading through the soft chip interior. Others added a full layer of sliced onions, which caramelized during baking and added sweetness to the salt-forward profile. North Dakota versions sometimes incorporated a can of diced green chilies, which sounds incongruous but worked surprisingly well against the richness of the soup and beef. What remained constant across all these variations was the ratio. Too many chips and the casserole became dry, the moisture from the soup insufficient to soften the inner layers properly. Too few and the dish lost its identity, becoming just another meat casserole with a crunchy topping. The right amount was roughly a full standard bag, about 10 to 12 ounces, distributed in two layers, one in the middle of the filling and one across the top before baking. This was rarely written down precisely because the cooks who made this dish didn't think in ounces. They thought in handfuls, in judgment, in the specific feel of enough. That knowledge gap, the difference between intuitive cooking and documented cooking, is exactly why the Chipwreck casserole almost vanished. The women who made it most often didn't write down their recipes in any standardized form. The dish lived in kitchens, transmitted person to person, mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor. When those transmission chains broke, when families moved, when communities dispersed, when the generation that cooked this way aged out of cooking, the knowledge became fragile. It didn't die entirely, but it retreated into the margins. Compare that to something like the green bean casserole, which was invented in 1955 by Dorcas Riley at Campbell's Soup Company's Home Economics Department. Riley's recipe was immediately documented, printed on soup can labels, distributed in promotional materials, and entered into Campbell's corporate archive. The recipe didn't need generational transmission chains because it was institutionalized from the start. Today, Americans make more than 20 million green bean casseroles every Thanksgiving. The dish is immortal, not because it's better than the Chipwreck casserole, that's a matter of taste, but because it had institutional backing and paper documentation. It was preserved by corporations rather than kitchens. The Chipwreck had neither. It was too specific, too regional, too informal for food companies to claim and standardize. Nobody printed it on a chip bag. No soup manufacturer ran a magazine ad featuring it. It belonged to the community of cooks who made it, and when that community stopped teaching it, the dish faded. There's a particular irony in this. The potato chip industry, which grew to over $11 billion in annual American retail sales by the early 21st century, never leveraged the Chipwreck casserole as a marketing vehicle, despite the dish being built almost entirely around their product. Frito-Lay, which had become the dominant chip manufacturer after its 1965 merger, spent millions developing chip dip recipes and snack pairing campaigns. But the baked, buried, transformative use of chips in a savory casserole that sat undiscovered on index cards in kitchen drawers. The dish has experienced something of a quiet revival in recent years, driven partly by the broader cultural nostalgia for mid-century American cooking, and partly by food bloggers who grew up eating versions of it and wanted to reconstruct the experience. Online recipe communities have produced dozens of variations, some faithful to the original, and some aggressively modernized with fresh herbs, quality beef, and artisanal chip brands. The modernized versions often miss the point. The Chipwreck casserole isn't a blank canvas for culinary expression. It's a specific solution to a specific problem: how to produce maximum flavor and textural satisfaction from cheap, shelf-stable ingredients in under an hour. That specificity is what gives it integrity. You can swap out the chip brand and get slightly different results. You can use a different soup and shift the flavor profile. But the fundamental architecture, beef, soup, chips in layers, baked until dual texture transformation occurs, has to remain intact, or you're making something else. The dish has rules, even if nobody wrote them down. And those unwritten rules tell you something important about how American food culture actually functioned at its grassroots level. Not every dish that fed America in the 20th century came from a test kitchen or a magazine spread. Many of the most beloved and effective recipes came from ordinary people solving ordinary problems with whatever was available. The Chipwreck casserole is evidence of genuine culinary creativity operating under real constraints. Someone looked at ground beef, a can of soup, and a bag of chips, the ordinary contents of a 1960s kitchen, and invented something that made sense. That made those ingredients do more than they were supposed to do. Whether anyone remembers who invented it is beside the point. The dish exists. People still make it in kitchens from Minnesota to Montana, following recipes their grandmothers never quite fully explained. The chips still dissolve into those dense, salty pockets at the bottom. The ones on top still stay crispy. The fork still breaks through the surface with that specific resistance, crunch, then softness, then richness, that defines the whole experience. The Chipwreck casserole was never famous. It never made a magazine cover or won a competition or got attributed to anyone by name. It just fed people, quietly and reliably, for decades. And in that quiet reliability, it captured something true about American cooking that the celebrated dishes never quite could. Not every meal needs a story behind it. Sometimes the story is the meal itself. Ordinary ingredients, extraordinary patience, and the specific knowledge that the chips on the bottom will take care of themselves.